Shalom, shalom lekulchem. It's wonderful to see everyone's faces, and thank you for coming on. I'm so honored that you find time to join. And normally the shiurim that I give are very, very give and take, but this is more a presentation which is frontal, as there is material, so much material that I wish to cover. And what I'll do is I'll speak in about 20-minute spurts and then open it up for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go back, and Ezrat Hashem, I hope you'll find it of some meaning. Our point of departure are some psukim that we read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah from Yirmiyahu Lamed Aleph, and the psukim read as follows. I did want to thank dear Rabbi Eric, who is going to be finishing Chovevei in a year or 2, for just being there, and I'm so grateful, Eric. Thank you so very, very much.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Ko Amar Adonai, thus says the Lord. Ko b'rama nishma nehi b'chi tamrulim rachel mevakar baneha me'ana li'inachem baneha ki einenu. Cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter wailing, weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. Ko Amar Adonai mini kolech mi bechi be'inayach mi dima. Ki yesh zacha lefulatechem Adonai v'shavu me'eretz oyev. Thus said the Lord, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears. For there is a reward for your labor, declares the Lord. They shall return from the enemy's land. Yesh tikva lachavitechem Adonai v'shavu banim legulam. And there is hope for your future, declares the Lord. Your children shall return to their country. Now, normatively, if I could face everyone, Eric, thank you. Normatively, these psukim are understood by a well-known medrash, and you know there are some midrashim which don't remain a medrash; they almost become part of the pshat of the pasuk, even though they're not. But this medrash understands the historical moment, the prophecy of Rachel crying, to refer to the galut of Malchut Yehuda, to refer to the exile of the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judea, after its exile, after the Churban Beit HaMikdash. And that's the way it's understood. Rachel is crying for her children. She's therefore not buried in Hebron. Together with Yaakov, Yaakov buries her in Ephrata, in Bethlehem, so that when the Jews would be exiled from Jerusalem, they pass her grave and people would cry, and she would be able to, Me'ana li'inachem, she refuses to be comforted, raising the voice on their behalf. And God responds and says, Yesh tikva la'achavitechem Adonai v'shavu banim legulam. That was the theme song of our chasna many years ago, more than 50 years ago, myself and Toby, v'shavu banim, v'shavu banim, v'shavu banim legulam. And that's the way it's understood. Now, what I'd like to do is take a particular look at Tanakh with a focus on Breshit and then spreading out to all of Tanakh, and trying to present a theology that speaks to the idea of Am Yisrael as not only being an Am, a nation, but a family. And through this idea, we'll then come back to these psukim which we've just read, and I'd like to see whether we can understand it in a broader fashion. And so our point of departure is an overview of Sefer Bereshit. I've had the great school to teach Bereshit my whole rabbinate. It's a long time, over 50 years. And it's understood in so many different ways. But when one looks at it in its basic manner, Bereshit is the story of fragmented families. And these fractured families go through many chapters. And by the end, miraculously, in its final moments, the family comes together. All of Bnei Yaakov are around Yaakov's bed. Bnei Yaakov gather around the bed, and the family is whole. Once the family is whole, Sefer Bereshit ends. It ends. And as Sefer Bereshit ends, Sefer Shemot, the book about the emergence of the nation of Israel, that begins. And so what Bereshit really teaches is that the best model of nation is family. Let me elaborate just for a moment. First Rashi of the Torah is Rabbi Yitzchak, Lo hayat tzarich la'achil et haTorah, ela me'achodesh hazeh lachem. Why do we need Bereshit? Let's start with the first mitzvah given Am Yisrael. Well, more broadly, let's start with the story of Am Yisrael becoming an Am. And for those who would argue, but we need some ancestry mentioned, but that could be said in a couple of sentences. Take a couple of sentences and we're through. Why such elaboration? And what I'm offering for your consideration is that Bereshit is talking about family because it's saying, in order to understand the deeper meaning of the nation of Israel, I have to understand the concept of family. Bereshit is fractured families that come together. That's what Bereshit is about. When it comes together, Bereshit is Fini. Story of the Am begins, teaching that the best model of nation is family. And I'd like to break that down a bit. Let's take a look at Bereshit, and let's take it from Avram and Sarah, that matter, Ephraim and Menashe. And what one finds is that the dissolution of family goes from bad to worse to horrific. So let's take it beginning with Yitzchak and Ishmael. Vatira Sarah ben Hagar mitzvit, sheyali Avraham Yitzchak. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham playing Yitzchak. Atoma li Avraham garesh hama zot v'et bena ki lo yirash ben hama zot b'li mitzvah. So she says to Abraham, cast him out. He has no place. This son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. And the rabbis are concerned. What did he do so terrible to warrant Sarah expelling him? And the rabbis say what they say. In fact, they say he did the most terrible things. And I argue that they say he did the most terrible things because they want to justify her reaction of expelling him. Truth be told, there's one word which describes what Yitzchak did, and that what Ishmael did, and that is he's mitzachek, which the JPS, the Jewish Publishing Study, or the JPS Bible, understands that Ishmael was Isaacic. He was in effect claiming, I am the covenantal heir to Abraham. That's where Sarah drew the line. And he, together with Hagar, he is expelled. But we have to understand that as much as they separate, they do separate, but there's no indication in the text that Ishmael and Yitzchak are threatening each other. Now let's take a look at it at the next generation. Go to the next generation, the story of Yaakov and Esav. After Yaakov takes the blessings, Vayistom Esav et Yaakov el Abraham, Esav harbored a grudge against Yaakov because of the blessing which his father had given him. Vayoma Esav b'libo, and this is what he says: Yikuvu Yemei Iyun v'agad Yaakov achi. And Esav says, "Let but the mourning period of my father come, and I will kill my brother Yaakov." Now here, this is taking it to another step. Whereas Yitzchak and Ishmael don't threaten each other, Esav is threatening Yaakov. He says, when Abba dies, I will kill Yaakov. And we move into the next generation, the generation of Yosef and his brothers. It takes it to another level. Vayikachehu, and the brothers took Yosef. We're picking it up in Perek Lamed Zayin. Vayashlichu oto habora, and they cast him into the pit. V'habor reik ein bo mayim. They take him. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Now this is not just bad. This is attempted murder. They take him and they throw him into the pit. And so if I can face everyone, we're moving from bad, where Yitzchak and Ishmael break up, to worse. Esav threatens Yaakov, to just a horrific scene where the brothers see Yosef as a threat, as the Sforno says, because Yosef wants to inherit the brothers. His dream about stars is the metaphor for children. Look at the stars, can you count them? His dream of wheat bowing to him, that's the dream of land and children represents the covenant, represents the Brit. So Yosef seems to be saying, I want the Brit, that Yaakov gives him the coat. Coat is the symbol, the executive branch of rulership. If you carry the coat, you're the ruler. And if the coat is torn, you no longer are the ruler. That's why the brothers ripped the coat off, the tunik pasim off Yosef. Yosef says, I want to be the leader. The brothers push back, and mamish, they try to murder him. And what's also fascinating, just as an aside, that when we look at this progression, it's interesting that the death of Abraham brings his children together, because Abraham is buried by Yishmael and Yitzchak, by his sons. And the death of Isaac, Yitzchak, is seen by Esav as a time that perhaps will be able to kill Yaakov. And Yaakov, when the brothers come to him with the ketonet basim, ripped asunder, dipped into the blood of the goat, Yaakov talks about his death as the time when he will still be mourning for the loss of his son Yosef. Death in life is often the time to take stock of the well-being of the family. In Genesis, in Breshit, death serves as a barometer to measure the state of togetherness of the patriarchal and matriarchal families. That's what I mean when I say that Breshit is this progression. It's a progression of the breakdown of families, moving from brothers who disagree but don't threaten, to brothers, to an Esau who threatens Yaakov, to the brothers who literally attempt to murder their brother Yosef. This concept of this downward plummeting movement is something that I heard in its fundamental stages from Mori Rabbi, the great Rabbi David Silver. What I'd like to point out is that by the end of Breshit, there is a coming together. There's a remarkable turnaround. And there are powerful images of reconciliation. Let's take them one at a time. First of all, there's the reconciliation of Yehuda and Binyamin. In the absence of Yosef, Yehuda's greatest threat is Binyamin. Yehuda, of course, is the son not only of Yaakov, but of Leah. And Reuven was not going to be the heir because he had, with the Pshuto shel Mikra, he slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, or the Ramban would say his father's wife. It was not going to be Shimon and Levi because of what they had done in Shlem. So Yehuda was the heir apparent. His adversary was Yosef, who was the eldest of Yaakov and Rachel. But now that Yaakov and Rachel was rid of, Yosef is gone, so Yehuda's greatest threat is Binyamin. And now in the Yosef story, we all know the narrative. Yosef was taken hostage by Yosef, who's disguised as the second to the king, says to the brothers, don't come back for more food until you bring Binyamin. And Yehuda stands up and he says to his father, Anochi ervenu. I myself will be the guarantor for Binyamin. Miyadi tivachsheno, you may hold me responsible. Lo havioti ve'echa v'tzakti b'fanecha. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, v'chatati lecha kol hayamim, I will have sinned, I shall stand guilty before you forever. Just looking at this pasuk, this is such a powerful pasuk. Yehuda uses the term ervenu, orave, the word a debtor. In the Gemara, there's a malveh, a lova, a creditor, a debtor. And then there is the orave, the guarantor. So if the debtor doesn't repay, then the debtor is obligated to make the payment. Here, Yehuda is in effect the lova, he's the debtor. He's saying to Yaakov, I'm going to return Binyamin. And who is the guarantor? The guarantor is the lova himself. The guarantor is not a third party. As Reuven said, if I don't bring him back, you can kill two of my sons as if they weren't the grandsons of Yaakov. What Yehuda says is, I will be the guarantor. Ben Mosaic, the Emlam Mikra, says it so deeply. He actually says, if I don't bring him back, the chatati lecha kol hayamim. Sometimes there's the sin and then the consequences of the sin. But it's also the case, the Emlam Mikra says, that the sin itself is its own punishment. People are most racked. People are most in limbo, most struggling. When one has done something, and even if there were no consequences, the sin is so profound, the guilt is so deep, that the sin is the punishment. One has not even been allowed a punishment to kind of cleanse the soul. And Yaakov says, with that guarantee, please, I allow you to take Binyamin back. And of course, we know the story that with the goblet and so on. And Yehuda is standing in the beginning of Vayigash before Yosef. He doesn't know it's Yosef. And he says, Ki avdecha arav et hanar be'im avi lemor im lo aviyenu elecha v'chatati avi kol hayamim. I am the guarantor for the child. I told my father, if I don't bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. I shall stand guilty. Sin itself is its own punishment. And as my Rebbe in Chumash Nechama Leibovitz points out, she says that the same Yehuda who sold Yosef, seeing him as a threat, and by the way, gives up his arevut, his guarantor in the Tamar story, that is the same Yehuda when Binyamin's life was most like Yosef when his life is threatened, this time given the Maimonidean second chance to do tshuva, being in the same situation he stands in. What a moment of reconciliation between Judah and Benjamin. And there's another moment of reconciliation, and this is the reconciliation between Ephraim and Menashe. Let's take a look at it. We now move to Parshat Vayechi. Vayishlach Yisrael et Yimino vayashet al rosh Ephraim. This is when the grandfather, he's the first grandfather in the Torah. I'm unaware of any other individual who functioned as a grandfather with grandchildren in Breshit. Yisrael does. V'hu atza'ir ve'etzmolo la rosh Menashe. Sikel et yadav ki Menashe habachor. Ki sikel et yadav. He crossed his hands. Although Menashe was the firstborn, he was placing his hands incorrectly. He was placing his hands incorrectly. And so, of course, we know what happens after he places his hands incorrectly. Look at the next pasuk. I'm sorry, let's keep it there. What happens is that Yosef steps in and he says, you're wrong. And Yaakov says, I mean it. I've done the correct thing. That's why the term here is sikel. He did it with his seichel. He do it with forethought. He understood exactly what he was doing. Now, what's most interesting here is that unlike Esau, who pushed back when Yaakov receives the blessings, in fact, he's ready to kill Yaakov, Menashe is very accepting. Menashe doesn't push back. Okay, grandfather says, you're the main grandson, the main child of Yosef. B'vakasha. There too, there's this moment of reconciliation. And there is a third moment of reconciliation. And that is the ultimate moment of reconciliation between Judah and Joseph, between Yehudah and Yosef. So let's take a look at it. You know, as a rabbi, I have seen too much of broken families, and it's not pashut. When families are broken, that they're brought together. It's not so simple. As a matter of fact, when Yosef really tells his brothers, Ani Yosef, he says, Ani Yosef, ha'od avicha. That's what he says. And there on the Farshim will point out that when Yosef reveals himself, he says, I'm Joseph, ha'od avicha. He didn't say, ha'od avinucha. It's my father. He's almost criticizing his brothers and saying, is my father really your father? Look at all the pain that you've caused, father. Now, of course, Yosef caused his father pain as well. But it's not so simple after you've been sold after 22 years to come full circle. And while there are those who think that as soon as Yosef introduced himself, they lived in peace, lo pashut. Let's look at the last parak in Breshit. This is after they had taken Yaakov from Egypt to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. When the brothers of Yosef saw that their father had died, Vayomru, and they said, Lu yistamenu Yosef. What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us? What if the only reason he didn't react and push back was because Abba was alive? What if the Hashev Yashiv Lanu et Kol Hara'a Asher Gamalnu Oto? Now that Abba is dead, what will be if he pays us back for all the wrong that he did? If I could face it. Could you imagine? Even at this moment, brothers think they're not fully at peace with Yosef, believing that Yosef is not at peace with the brothers. Now, there's a lot of discussion that the brothers misunderstood Yosef. This is already Midrashim. I'm looking at Pshuto Shemikra. And again, this is a beautiful insight I heard from Rabbi Silver. And I have found this true to be in my rabbinate. There are times when a sibling rivalry is so deep and the fissure so profound that siblings can't make up. Well, they can't come together fully. Sometimes their children can. I've seen in my rabbinate how siblings have a falling out, but the next generation, the cousins, can get together. Going through my mind are several cases that I've worked on throughout the years. That's the way it is. And maybe that's why there is no Shevet Yosef. There is no Shevet Yosef because you can only be a Shevet if you have the potential to live in peace with your brethren, with the other tribes. Yosef couldn't live in peace with the other tribes. There's no Shevet Yosef. Although there's no Shevet Yosef, there is a Shevet Ephraim and a Shevet Menashe. There is a Shevet Ephraim and a Shevet Menashe, because they'll be able to make peace. And that fleshes out what Breshit is all about. It's dissolution of family from bad to worse, to horrific, attempted murder. And by the end of Breshit, it turns around. Family comes together. Family comes together on many, many different levels. Yehuda is the Orei for Binyamin, who in the absence of Yosef is his greatest threat. Menashe, the eldest, accepts Ephraim as the spiritual heir. And the brothers make peace with Yosef, not through Yosef, but through Ephraim. Now that Breshit has ended, the family is intact. V'ni, Breshit ends, Shmot begins. How does Shmot begin? Shmot begins with the story of the development of the nation. And my contribution for you to consider is the reason there was a Sefer Breshit is because Breshit stresses what I call the Brit Mishpacha, the covenant of family. Everyone understands that the major Brit is Brit Sinai. That's the Brit of Shmot. But there was a precursor, and that was the Brit of Breshit. And Rav Kook says that the Brit of Breshit, the Brit of Ben Abtarim, he writes, is the Brit Avot, the inherent superiority of the family of Israel. The Rav says, no, inherent in the Brit Ben Abtarim, it's the Brit Mitzrayim. These are my mentors. I owe so much to Rav Kook, the writings of Rav Kook, and to my Rebbe, Rav Yoshe Ber. I part company with that. I struggle with the first covenant that is based on innate Jewish superiority, and struggle with a foundational covenant which is reacting, Brit Mitzrayim. Reactions don't last. I much prefer looking at Breshit, Perek Tetvav, as being the Brit Mishpacha, the covenant of family. Brit Sinai is the covenant of nation. Again, the best motto of nation is family. Now, friends, open your hearts. If Breshit ends with the family intact, as a matter of fact, all of the Torah ends with the family intact. Think about it. As we enter into Eretz Yisrael after 40 years in the desert, Yehoshua from Shevet Ephraim is the leader. In the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, we're told that Shevet Judah is right at his side as they liberate Eretz Yisrael. But when we look into the Navi, especially the Nevi'im Rishonim, what occurs is an unraveling of that sense of unity. And I'd like to take it piece by piece. We spoke about the unification of Yehuda and Binyamin. So let's take a look at the Navi, and specifically, let's take a look at Shmuel Perek Aleph. We're moving now from the time of Judges into the time of kings. And who is the first king? Shaul. And Shaul, of course, is an Ish Yemini. He's from Shevet Binyamin. So why is it that the first king is from Shevet Binyamin? Why is that? Why wasn't the first king from Shevet Yehuda? Now we're aware that in the narrative Pilegesh B'Kiva and Shoftim Yutet, the tribe of Binyamin is temporarily excised. And could it be suggested, as some of our Shim suggest, that it was in an effort to reconcile and bring Binyamin back into the fold that Shaul of Shevet Binyamin is chosen as the first king? Because the role of the king, in no small measure, is to unite the Am. Each judge represented a Shevet, a couple of Shvatim, but there was no federal executive officer bringing everyone together. The role of the king was to unite the Am. Choosing Shaul was an attempt to do just that by bringing in a leader from the tribe that was most alienated from the larger nation of Israel, if I could face everyone. And tragically, that doesn't work. What happens in Shmuel Aleph is you would think that Goliath, when Goliath was out there, he was the tallest of people. So you would think, who should be the one to fight Goliath? It should be Shaul, who's also tall. He's described as being tall, but Shaul can't do it. And who steps in for him? David from Shevet Yehuda. And he's the opposite of Shaul. He fights differently. He is different. And he succeeds. And one would think at that moment, maybe Shaul would be proud of mentoring David HaMelech. That's what you would think. Let's take a look at the Pasuk in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Yudchet, Pasuk Tet. What does the Pasuk say after David HaMelech was so successful? Vayehi Shaul oyein et David me'ayom hahu v'hala. From the day on, from that day on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Devout. Where's the unity of Yehuda and Binyamin? It's lost. Shaul, the descendant of Binyamin. David, the descendant of Yehuda. And in Tanakh, those descendancies are very important in understanding the progression of how Yehuda and Binyamin evolved. Now Yehuda and Binyamin are at each other's odds, are at odds. And we spoke about Ephraim and Menashe coming together. Let's take a look at what happens in Perek Yudbet of Shoftim. In Perek Bet, Yiftach, who is Yiftach HaGiladi, he's from Menashe. So Yiftach is the leader in warring against Ammon and is very, very victorious in this war. And Ephraim is very upset that he had not been invited into the battle. And Menashe and Ephraim then become involved in a civil war. Look at the psukim. Vayokod Gilad et Mabrot HaYarden leEphraim. And the Giladites, these Menashites, held the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. The Hayak Yomru Pliti Ephraim, Evora, Vayom Mulo Anshe Gilad HaEphratiata Vayomelo. So the Menashites were out to capture the Ephraimites, and they were crossing. The Ephraimites were escaping, were running across the fords of the Jordan, of the river. And Ephraim said, let me cross. So the men of Gilad famously said, are you Ephraimites? And the Ephraimites say, no. The Menashites said, Emor no shibolet. Say the word shibolet. Vayomer, And instead of saying Shibolet, they had a lisp. They said Sibolet. They couldn't pronounce Shibolet. They instead Sibolet, not being able to pronounce it correctly. Thereupon, they would seize him. Anshe Gilad Menashe would seize Ephraim and slay him by the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites fell at that time. Gewalt. What happened to Menashe accepting Ephraim as a leader? Here, Menashe is involved in the killing of 42,000. And if I could face everyone with this thought, what was this Shibolet and Sibolet? The simple approach was they knew that the Ephraimites had a lisp. I'd like to offer a suggestion more deeply. Is it possible that Shibolet means wheat. Wheat is food, bread of strength. And so the Menashites said to the Ephraimites, say Shibolet. We dare you to say what means wheat, power. We dare you to say that you are the most powerful, that you have the upper hand as you've had until now. And what do they say? Sibolet. Listen, if it was a lisp, it should be spelled with a sin. It's with a samach. Sibolet comes from the word sabal, a porter. In a certain sense, a sabal is someone who is subservient, carrying heavy loads of others, or sabal, one who suffers. So Menashe says to Ephraim, I dare you to say you're in control, and forces them to say, we're not in control. Here, Menashe overlords Ephraim. It's a far cry from Bereshit, when Menashe makes room for Ephraim. As per Yaakov's wishes, here Menashe makes no room for Ephraim at all. And it unravels further in the Judah-Joseph-Ephraim narrative. Let's take a look at Malachim Aleph. What happens? The southern kingdom, the kingdom of Yehudah splits into the kingdom of Yehudah to the south. And then there is a Yeravam ben Nevat who is in the north. And look at the pasuk, the Yeravam ben Nevat Ephrati, Gewalt. Yeravam of Nevat, he was from Shevet Ephraim. Min Hatzreda v'Shemi Motzua Isha Almana Evet Lishlomo Vayarem Yad Bamelech. The same Yehudah who in Bereshit, who by the end of the Torah is in peace with Ephraim. They're marching into Eretz Yisrael. Here, there is a break. And if one looks into the Pesukim, into Perek Yud Aleph, the split occurs when Rechavam, the son of Shlomo HaMelech, ultimately becomes the king of Shevet Yehudah, rejects the advice of his elders to tell Yeravam he be treated kindly. That's a far cry from Bereshit, where Yehudah shows reverence for his elderly father, following his orders, and which lead to a rendezvous with Yosef. It's all broken down, if I could face everyone. Bereshit is the story of families who are together. Genesis tells of families intact. The Torah tells us of families intact. But the Nevi'im Rishonim, most of the prophets, they tell us of the opposite. They leave us in an opposite direction, fragmentation. Yehudah and Binyamin are no longer together. Ephraim and Menashe are killing each other. And the kingdoms are split between the kingdom of Yehudah and the kingdom known as Malchut Ephraim, the son of Ephraim. So I want to say something very deep. The challenge today is to repair that brokenness brokenness that unfolded in the Navi, and to begin a new blueprint that returns us to the end of Brishit, to the end of the Chumash when they were together. Let's take a look at Sefer Yecheskel, very powerful. It's actually the Haftorah of Parshat Vayigash. What does it say in that Haftorah? It says the following. Bata, then Adam Yecheskel says, Kach lecha etz echad. Take a stick, uchtov alav liYehuda, and write upon it liYehuda, v'livnei Yisrael chaverav, and the Israelites associate with him. Kach etz echad, and take another stick, uchtov alav liYosef, but right away, etz Ephraim, because Ephraim is that representative of Yosef. V'chobet Yisrael chaverav. On one stick, write Yehuda. On the other stick, write Ephraim. And then the Navi says in the next pasuk, he says the following: Daber aleichem, Ko amad Adonai Elohim, Hinei ani lokeach etz Yosef asher biyad Ephraim, v'shiftei Yisrael chaverav, v'natati otam alav et etz Yehuda, v'asitim be'etz echad, v'hayu echad biyadi. They're apart. Bring them together. Let Yehuda and Yosef through Ephraim, let them become one. Let them become a full family. Which brings me back, if you will, to our star. Let's take a look at those psukim in Yirmiyahu. The pasuk reads, Ko amad Adonai, thus says the Lord, Ko b'ramah nishma, I hear a voice high, Mihi, wo b'chi tamurim, Rachel mevakar baneha me'ana minachem, al baneha tienenu. Our children are not. God says, restrain your voice from weeping, because v'shavu vanim likvala. While the normative understanding is that this is the cry of Rachel, crying for Galut Yehuda, I'm wondering, maybe not. Or maybe it could be said this way, she's also crying for her own children. Rachel is the mother of Yosef and Binyamin. She is crying for Ephraim that 150 years before the Churban Bayit was exiled. She is crying for the reunification of the Aseret HaShvatim, that the 10 tribes should be reunited with Yehuda. The split should no longer be. And so in Perek Chaf of this Perek, the Navi calls out, Ben Yakili Ephraim, in Yeled Shashuim. Truly Ephraim is a dear son to me, a child that is dandled. Kimidei Dabiba. Whenever I have turned against him, even as the Aseret HaShvatim were exiled, Zachor Eskurenu Od, I remember him even the more. Al Kain Hamu Me'ai Lo. My heart yearns for him. Rachem Arachmenu Adonai. I will receive him back in love. Declares the Lord. Ben Yakili Ephraim in Yeled Shashuim. I can face everyone. This was my solo when I was 4 years old in my father's choir. It's of course in the Tefillah of Rosh Hashanah. Habe Yakili Ephraim in Yeled Shashuim. Shuin Ki Tedabri Bo Zahachot Eskirenu. My son, in his brilliant work, Pious Irreverence, which beautifully studies the theology of the abandonment of God. So he writes that it's precisely in the moment that we think God is abandoning us that the Midrash has the rabbis say that it's precisely then God says, I've not abandoned you, I'm with you. Ben Yakeli Ephraim, you're going to return. And friends, this has impacted my life, my approach to Tanakh, especially as I grow older and enjoying the fruits of these wonderful years with Toby, with my family. I view Tanakh, I view Gemara from a more spiritual plane and a more plane that brings its application back to practical life. And when I look at the nation of Israel, to the best of my ability, I have a philosophy. I always replace the word nation with the word family, and I try to act accordingly. And what's true about nation is true about any part of the nation, like a community, like a synagogue, like a hillel. That's why when I look at our synagogue, I don't see it as a synagogue. I see it as a bayit, as a home in which a family lives. I prefer using the motto, not of congregation, but of family. I prefer looking at Am Yisrael as Mishpachat Yisrael, the family of Israel. And I'm talking about families that work. And we should all be working hard towards helping that occur. What happens when we're a family? Several things happen. First of all, the boundaries soften. Think about a congregation. It's also a family. If you're a congregation, no, the rabbi is the rabbi, the congregants are the congregants. If you're a family, the boundaries soften. I'm not Rabbi Weiss, I'm Rabbi Avi. Stephen is Rav Stephen. I hope this is, and I do believe that this is the culture of Chovevei, the Shivat Mara. It's Ravdov Shlita. It's Rabasara Shlita. It's a closer association. That's why the bayit is the bayit. It's a house. In the house, there are family. That's why in the bayit, I don't sit in the front. I sit amongst the people. It's a family. It's a family. Two, not only do the boundaries soften, the discourse should become more civil because we're family. No, I understand that it's precisely in families because the potential is that we be together, it could be so acrimonious. But families should be working towards a civil discourse. We should be drafting what I have called an ethics of dissent. When we talk to our siblings, when we talk to our fellow sister Jews, they are our brothers and sisters. And the ethics of dissent says we have to be very careful with words. Well, a word is a word and a deed is a deed. Words lead to deeds. When we were kids, we used to say, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never harm me. It's not true. It's a family. Words can hurt. We have to be careful with words. And in families that work, we have to listen to each other. Listen, not just hear. Listen to each other. And if there are two positions, can I stop impugning the motives of the other? Let's think about the family of the Tinat Israel. If I'm on the right, and I am on the right politically, can I look at my brothers and sisters on the left and recognize that I have no monopoly on loving the land of Israel? They, Rav Yehuda Amital of blessed memory, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, ready to negotiate land for peace, didn't love the land of Israel any less than I did. Impugning the motive, saying that those who are prepared to negotiate land, they don't care about the land, that's impugning motives. And the left should not impugn my motives. I want peace as much as they want peace. Politically, I want to make sure I have someone to talk to. But that makes the discussion very, very, very different and more. Ethics of dissent is recognition that I have no monopoly on loving Am Yisrael, Torah Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael. My conservative and my reform colleagues are as passionate as I am about the love of the people of Israel, as I am passionate in my own ways. And yes, we can learn from each other. We can learn from each other. I wrote a book, Spiritual Activism, and I used to do this gig with Rabbi David Saperstein. He headed the Reform Action Committee. And I'll never forget one time in the sweetest way, he picked up my book in front of many people in dialogue, and he said, Avi, there are Gentiles in the world. I said, of course, every human being is created in Tzelem Elokim. He said, they're part of our family. And I said, of course, they're Mishpachot Amim. He said, you got to talk about social justice. I'm very, very grateful to him. He spoke about that. There's Mishpachot Amim, there's the Mishpachot of Am Yisrael. Now, I'm of the opinion that a strong sense, this has been true for decades now, of national identity, national consciousness, a national family, using family, does not contradict a sense of universal family, but is a prerequisite to it. It's a prerequisite to it. But first, I have to know who I am. It's easy to love everyone. If you love everyone, you don't have to love anyone. The test of the way you love everyone is the way you love someone. So if we're family, the boundaries soften. The discourse is more civil. And we're more inclusive. Families are intergenerational, young and old. If I'm a family that is a synagogue, it's not a place just for young people or just for old people. If we're a family nation, it's not that I segregate older people and I put them aside and they're has-beens. No, it's intergenerational. I bring intergenerationality into my schools, families, into my hillels, not just as a one day a month affair. If we're family, whatever the sexual orientation, I receive you. Whatever in the end you're going to believe, I give wings to our children. Where they fly, they're my family. I love them. I love them no matter what. Whatever their disabilities, inclusivity, and increased responsibility. If we're family, it increases responsibility. How I remember watching on CNN, the Aliyah, the 1994 pictures, video of the Aliyah exploded. And I turned to Toby, I said, so my activist days, I have to go. Toby said, you don't speak Spanish. Argentina's far away. And I said to them, my brothers and sisters, they're not just my nation. And went, and that turned out to be some of the most meaningful days of my life and relationships that I developed. And now there's a student of an Argentinian rabbi at Chovevei. If we think of our brothers and sisters, if I think that Hadar Golden, whose body must be returned, is not only a soldier in the Israeli army, but he's my son. That's different.
Rabbi Avi, 5 minutes left. 5 minutes left.
Thank you. And that's it. Story of the Torah. Thank you, Eric. His family's broken. Families together, Bereshit and Chumash. They break down in Nach. Our challenge is to bring them together, that we are our family. that's our challenge. And I want to stop here. We have 3 or 4 minutes and get your thoughts on it. If you have any take on this. Please, anybody?
There's a question or a comment in the chat by Arnie Kramer. If Arnie would like to ask that, I'm going to ask him to unmute.
Hi, Avi.
Hi, Ani.
I was just saying that there are many examples that we all know in modern times of the Jewish family being divided, ripped apart, but there are also examples that maybe are quieter of coming together. And I'm specifically remembering Menachem Begin's operation to rescue Ethiopian Jews, which was aptly called Operation Brothers. So coming together can happen on a big scale or a grassroots scale. I'm just wondering if you can give other examples that you see, in modern times of coming together of disparate members of the Jewish family.
I appreciate that, Arnie. And, we have 2 or 3 minutes and I want to stop on time. So I want to say this. First, I think this is the greatest challenge we face. Greatest. I believe it's greater than the physical challenge of Iran and terrorists all around Medinat Israel, and it's serious business. I believe it is an even greater challenge than the spiritual challenges that we face, and that is serious stuff. It's that we've got to do better in the Knesset when people just screaming at each other, v'chulu, v'chulu. And I'm talking to myself and letting you listen. I've got to do better. The test of love of family is not how we love each other when we agree, but how we love each other and talk to each other when we disagree. That's the big test. So just a story. I was involved in Netzach Hazani, which is one of the communities that in 2005, it was Sharon was the prime minister and the disengagement. And so that whole town was shut down. And there was a family there. I stayed with the Ephraim family, but there was a family there called the Yefet family. And Itamar Yefet was a young man who was murdered by terrorists. And he lived in Gaza. That's the closing of the settlements in Gaza. I don't even like the term. And Itamar's parents are Benny and Rachel Yefet. So the soldiers came in, the Israeli soldiers, to take them out. And as they're taking them out, this is my story of unity. I think I have 1 more minute. As they're walking out, so Benny Yefet, the father, turns to the Sgan Aluf. I think the Sgan Aluf is a lieutenant colonel. His name was Lav. His name got around and said, I didn't think we would leave. Will you allow me to go back? And will you allow me to take my 2 most prized possessions? And Lav says, I'm an army man. We have no time, but of course. I've always wondered if we can go back to our homes to take just 2 things, what would we take? He goes back, climbs up to the roof, takes down the Israeli flag, walks out the front door and takes down the mezuzah. So he has his 2 most prized possessions. He didn't take a Renoir. He takes down an Israeli flag and he takes the mezuzah. And as he's walking, listen to this. He turns to the Sgan Aluf and says, Sgan Aluf, Taseli Tova, do me a favor. I don't know where I'm going. If I'm going to carry this flag in mezuzah, I'm going to lose it. Do me a favor. You hold on to it. But I want you to promise me that when I rebuild a new home, that I'll call you and you will come and you put up the mezuzah and raise the Israeli flag. And here, this religiously observant Jew and I believe Scott was not. And this individual, one more to the right and the other very much to the left, just fell on each other's shoulders for a moment. And I'm trying to follow up because I've heard most recently that finally, after all these years, they built a new home, the Yefetz have. And I want to make sure that Scott goes and he comes. And I think I have this from my own family. I have an older sister, Tova, who is a brilliant writer. She's a feminist writer. She's known in writing circles as having one of the greatest pens, Tova Reich. Perhaps some of you have read her work, but her world, because of her feminist concerns, she struggles with orthodoxy. That's not where she's at. I have a brother who's much more traditional and firm. Another sister who's living in the Rainbow Coalition. She's still a woman of the 60s, and she's my spiritual mentor, lives in Spain. I have another brother who was granted smicha by YU, Orthodox, but now is traditional Migal. It's the Baal Tfilah in the Riva service in Toronto. But you want to know something? Our lives have taken us in different directions, but our love for each other is unconditional. Unconditional. That's love of family. Love of family. My greatest switch for my children. Of course, I want them to be healthy and long life. I want them to get along. I want them to be family. And that is so true for Am Yisrael. That has been, for me, the Tzav HaSha'ah. That's why I want to encourage you, if you wish, I'll try to put out there a piece that I wrote, a lengthy, complicated, much more complicated than what I offered. A Nation is Family, tracing it through Tanakh and the implications. And I hope you find it of meaning. So my blessings to you as we come to this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that Abena Kili Ephraim, that there be a coming together of the north and of the south, of Yudan, Shomron, and the Green Line, within the Green Lines. Stop yelling at each other. Start listening to each other, learning from each other, appreciating the good in each other. That is so critical, as the Navi says, the time of the Mashiach, Eliyahu says, Veshiv Levavot al Banim. Parents and children will interact. And Ben Sira, 2 centuries before the common era, Ben Sira, he actually writes, it'll be a time, his words are, when not only intergenerationally will come together, Ulhachim Shiftei Yisrael, when the tribes of Israel, the people of Israel, will once again come together. My blessings. And, it's a great honor to have all of you join me in this study. I apologize, it was so frontal, but it's the nature of these Yemei Iyun. It's sort of like a paper that's delivered. I hope there'll be other opportunities that we can give and take, learn from each other. You have so much more to teach me than I you. My blessings, a sweet Chag. My thanks to Eric. Eric, thank you so much. And my blessings to all of you for a year of life and health and fulfillment. Shana Tova Mituka.